Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
I don't know quite how you would classify my father in terms of socio-economic status. He'd been to the same school that I went to, and he came after Radcliffe Brown. Radcliffe Brown was there in the 1880s, and he must have come there in the early, my father must have come there in the early years of this century. He was also there with J.R. Tolkien. Yes. And in fact, I have a letter, I have it over there, a letter that Tolkien wrote to him about their days together, and with echoes of those of their classmates who were killed in World War I, which rather goes in line with that thesis that The Lord of the Rings is an allegory on World War I as it was for Tolkien. But anyhow, But he didn't make much of his education. He didn't think so himself. And when I was, all the time in my life, practically all the time in my life, he was a sales manager electrically in Birmingham for Turner's Asbestos Cement. They sold asbestos equipment for electrical installation, good insulator. But I think he managed nobody other than secretaries. So to call him a manager is, I think, misleading. And I would suppose, in class terms, it would be probably lower middle. She was a lady of great imagination, very little education. Her parents was rather strange people, in that her father living in the area between Birmingham and Coventry, found that he could get a cheapest schooling for the children by renting a house in Coventry, installing a housekeeper there, and having all the children there, and brought back to visit the parents sometimes on Sundays with invitation. And the parents saw relatively little of their children. They left them all with the housekeeper. I had an uncle who used to insist that nobody in the family should ever eat a meal from newspaper, because they'd had newspaper on the table in this little house in Coventry, which he claimed had added to their general knowledge. Yes, so that my parents got me into this same school as my father, which never continued. That is academically astonishing. Tremendous. Well, oh yes, indeed, yes. Rose Dickinson, yes, and learning about the concept of culture from comparing Athenian and Spartan ideas of education. Yes, yes. I think that would be my argument, that it should be possible to teach social anthropology in school, if it was possible to teach classics, which is what. And I think it's unfortunate that Edmund encouraged the RAI and others, Edmund Leach, yes, to leave the field open to sociologists to grab school teaching in the school. And that when there have been efforts to get more of a socio-anthropological component of this, the teachers of all times would protest incompetence in teach such topics, which is very sad, because my philosophy has been that it is better for students coming to subjects like sociology to learn about other societies first, to learn a certain technique before they try to apply it to their own society. Otherwise, they simply take a political one. Yes, well, lots of all good academics think that subject is one that should be started at the postgraduate level. No. I can see that for an older generation it would be more undermining than for the new generation. I think particularly with regard to religion. My generation was still brought up in a culture which took so much rich framework from religion, and that I remember about that time, I wrote that essay, I fixed it after 1914, somewhere there. I put in for 15, 14, I think. I put in for a divinity prize at school, which was on Mark's Gospel, and so with the arrogance which schoolboys are capable, I started writing my own translation. And I found how difficult it was. Tremendously difficult. I learned from that the first of the Gospels, wasn't written until at least 30 years after Jesus died. The first three Gospels all seem to draw on some hypothetical, unpublished thoughts. And this was really very disturbing, and it took me years to work through what had been my initial belief, having been brought up as mainly Catholic, that to believe the Gospels was only rational. They were a reliable source. Yeah. No. Yeah. Tension between revelation and reason. Oh. Yeah. Oh yes, in favour of reason. Yes. Revelation nowhere. Just the other day, I was looking at a book which was commended by Mike Ginsberg, of the same man as who wrote The Greek Real Life. And yes, and he must have been was he? And what he has to say there in the beginning about Revelation is really very interesting. Yeah. So, for people of my generation, and in particular his generation, social anthropology certainly could be undermining, but I don't think it is for the new generation.
Could be undermining, but it's often been noted that most of the best politics were religious, that either, as Mr. Clark was like, they were either Catholics or Jews.
Yes. I don't think so, no. I can see why it could be like that for some people. No, I was brought up virtually Catholic in one of the rebel churches in Birmingham Diocese, which was the sacrament. The bishop stayed there. The bishop was another Cambridge mathematician, Ernest William Barnes. Yeah. My parents didn't choose. My mother died by that time. And I was in the Navy. I was at that time. I think at that time I was probably on Orcadia, a fleet minesweeper. I was navigating officer there, and I was taking a course in qualification for the Chartered Institute of Secretaries, which I thought might be kind of job to go into when I was demobilised. And then a signal came round saying we're going to give scholarships to the university for people like me, and that was wonderful. And then this opened up the prospect. At the age of 15, I had said to my father that I would like to be a barrister, and he said it would cost too much money. So I had abandoned that thought, and from then onwards I didn't have any career aspiration at all.
Did you do the Navy because you were called up or as a career?
Oh no, I knew I would be called up, so I thought it was better to anticipate that. And so I went into Naval Officer Selection School.
What age?
Oh, that would be in 16, 17, somewhere thereabouts.
Before the war?
Oh no, this was during the war. So I mean, I started on this selection course in 1944 at Glasgow University. I spent most of my time sweeping seas around Britain and off the coast of Norway, and off Northern Ireland too.
So then you went to the LSE.
Yes, so this signal said, that there would be scholarships for people like you. And I asked at school, and as a result of that, I wrote asking whether I could get a place at Queen's College, Oxford, or University College, and got this answer that so many of their own uniform students were coming back, there wasn't a chance. So I thought, well, I've got to look somewhere else. And I thought of LSE because I wanted to read economics. I thought London was a more appropriate atmosphere. The reasoning is very bad, but that was the reason. And where could be more appropriate than a place which had economics in its very name? So I put in for that with no knowledge really about the presentation or anything. I was astonished afterwards when I found that only 1 in 20 were accepted. I went along for an interview, and I remember that in the course of the interview, when I got from I thought I might be able to think. I knew I couldn't write, but I thought I might be able to think. And quite a bit afterwards, I wondered when people complimented me on things like this. I wondered where I got this idea from that I couldn't write. And I realized it was because my last 2 years of school I was together with Kenneth Tyner. And as a schoolboy, he wrote marvelously. He had decided at the age of 13 he wanted to do dramatic cricket, which is unusual, a career choice at that age. And so that was how I ended up at LSE, really chance. And then the chance that I had Shils as the tutor. Did you ever interview Godfrey Lienhardt? No. Well, let me give you an anecdote about him, at an ASA meeting. Somebody was asking how we got into social anthropology. And Lienhardt had said that after his part 1, he and some others were lying on the grass, looking at the prospectuses for part 2. Yes. And somebody said, oh, I've decided. And Godfrey said, I've decided too. When in fact he hadn't. So somebody then asked him, well, what have you decided? And Lienhardt looked down at the first thing that was on the list, and that was anthropology and archaeology. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
So at the LSE, your first tutor was Ed Shils.
Yes.
Can you tell me something about Shils? I met him later in life.
He was a strange character then. I think he was undergoing psychoanalysis. Of course, Edmund too. Yeah. I remember sitting there in his room when there was a knock on the door, and he opened it and peered round the edge like that, and as he peered like that, there was something about him. And I heard a voice at the other side asking, would he come and address the Zionist Society on anti-Semitism? And he said no, he wouldn't, and closed the door. And then he put his tongue out at the questioner from behind the closed door, which was not the kind of conduct I was accustomed to. So, and then he married a lady whose name I forget. But Donald McRae thought that Henry was some president strange person to choose but I don't know. But I think that if he was a disturbed character at that time, he sorted himself out. And I got quite a number of letters on file. And there was a very nice collection of articles about him in the journal Minerva, which he founded. Oh, tremendous. I mean, hey, you mentioned Evan Fisher talking about Jews. This was something new for me in television, to meet so many Jews and so many who were so consumed by the desire for learning. I mean, there'd been Jews at school, and sometimes good people. As far as I was concerned, they were simply boys who didn't come to prayer. It wasn't going to go through it. But here one met people who were so keen, on learning. It was a great enthusiasm. I could really understand it. And one got a bit of it from Popper, although of course Popper's Jewish origins were rather more questionable. Have you read that book, Wittgenstein's Focus? Well, I quoted it in that document, you see, when he said, when I went back and told him that I thought I wanted to take anthropology as a special subject, he said, well, go register in the anthropology department. No, I want to take sociology as a special subject. He said, go register in the anthropology department. You will learn more sociology there than in the department that I'm in. Shils wasn't comfortable with his colleagues in sociology faculty, and he very much like Audrey. Yes, and I think he got a lot from listening to her. Yes. Shils, of course, was he was attuned to the English class structure, and Audrey would fit in with that. Sure. Yes. Must have been. Yes. Must have taken it up. He was living in Hitchin in that time. Yep. And he was nice. One could talk with him, but he didn't have anything like the. I didn't experience him as having anything like as much to teach me. Sure. No comparison. He must have been starting to work on that. Oh, profound. The other people who you meant teachers, not students. I mean, M.G. Swift, who died early, he was in the same group. And Mrs. Stanley, who was the wife of the then Indonesian foreign minister. And there was all that section, a lesson in Blakeslee section. No, yeah, Swift. Swift, not. I met M.G. Smith, yes, later. Yeah. Oh yes, yes, yes. Ginsberg influenced me quite a bit, yes. But the sociology students were those who were keen, were divided into those who some who called themselves Ginsbergians and others Shils. And Ginsberg was the old guard. Shils was teaching us how to do empiricism. It was later that I came to appreciate what Ginsberg had to say about the space of reason. No, later. He came along about 51. I was in Stepney. I was doing that research and going in occasionally to functions at LSE. Don't think I met Ernest there.
Something about the Stepney research.
Well, it's in that book, Coloured Quarter. And
How did you get to Stepney? Why is that?
Kenneth Little had come back from Sierra Leone in, must have been round about 46, somewhere there. And when the boat left the last African port, some stowaways did. One of whom was Joe Appia, who married Peggy Cripps and is presumably the mother of Anthony Appia at Harvard, the philosopher. And so Little got interested in the stowaway phenomenon, because there were quite a number of West Africans coming to this stowaway. And he got a grant from the Noel Buxton Foundation, the chairman of which at that time was G.J. Thompson, who was associated with the Noel Buxton Foundation. And he was really in transport economics activity. And this was, they had, of course, the Noel Buxton connection was anti-slavery, and they had noticed the growth of the West African population in London and thought maybe some research following on Kenneth Little's research in Britain would be useful. And he had this grant from them. This was £400 for each of 2 years, and a bit too expensive, for me to study the colonial stowaway. And Little's idea was that I would interview these chaps in prison, because they all had their sentence in prison after being defective. I thought this was a rough idea. Interviewing people. And so I gradually persuaded him to convert this into a community study of Cable Street area. Yes, did. Well, it was taking the same migratory movement, one step back and looking at migration from the hinterland into the coast itself. Well, I've been in Norway, the Navy. I've been in France as an LSE student, and then afterwards I've been in Germany too. I went to one of my German trips. I signed up in Paris as a member of the French team on a long course for Franco Alamar. But no, I remember being asked by somebody on the ship going out to Sierra Leone, had I been abroad before, and I said no, And it was interesting because, you know, for me, I knew that for him abroad meant, you know, colonies, you know, outside Europe. And so I answered no, when it was technically quite wrong. Oh yes, yes. We stayed to start with in a little house on the college campus up the hill. But after 3 weeks, my wife went into hospital with a second abortion. And she was there for another 2 weeks or so. And that, and then her need to take things easy afterwards. You know, constrained what I could do quite a bit. And she had a remarkable, you know, return to youth. Because after this, the doctors said they thought it was better. She went back to her father. And we couldn't get her onto planes because the planes were coming from Rio across to Dakar. And we were booked up in Rio. We couldn't get a booking. We got one eventually. She had to cross the estuary in this tiny boat to the other side, and then have a rather bumpy bus journey to the airport, and then a pretty bumpy flight in the train to Dakar, and a very bumpy change in Dakar when she was able to get this plane that took her to London. Spent a night in London and then could get a plane to Stockholm and then a further plane up to and she delivered the baby on the due date 7 days after arrival. So these things do constrain one's research. I wasn't able to spend a lot of time outside Sudan. Yes. She was a grammar school teacher who gave up a salary 3 times mine to share mine. I missed German at school because I had switched from classics to history, and the classics is German, you know, later, and the historians had done it earlier. So I had to learn some for myself. I thought I should. And I went off to a summer school in Austria and met her there, so I did my course in German. And we at first we talked German together, then for a moment we switched to English, and then when the children were small, we brought them up speaking Swedish. And then after children left home, then we come back to English. Sure, migration, and then you know, the life of migrants in the town. Yes, I think the main contribution to that was what I had to say about the formation of young men's companies, voluntary associations. I didn't at that time appreciate the point that Wallenstein, Emmanuel Wallenstein, yes. He wrote a very good article in the Cahiers de Philosophie, in which he said that yes, we got these associations all along the coast, but they were a sort of cosmopolitan thing, and after independence they would fall away. And they did, you know, by Abner Cohen's time, they've gone completely, or at least he said that. I didn't appreciate that, but something I didn't mind. No, to Scotland. Yeah. Yes, Little got me a place there, which is a permanent place there. and which was, because you see, I got 2 children by that time. I think it had been there coming. And what I would have done had he not, no, I didn't try to do something in business. Jimmy let the job. Malcolm Rule came along after a while. Yes, yes, yes. I said to Malcolm when he arrived that he would find the department pretty bush, meaning by that there wasn't the intellectual thing that I thought there should be. I was just not in my time. He probably was, but not with me. And of course, he wouldn't have an awful lot of money for it. We were very poor. Oh, yeah. There was Noel Stevenson. And then he recruited Ewan Lewis, yes. Till 65. Bristol, yes. It was advertised as sociological studies. And they interviewed only 3 people. One was John Beattie, one was Ian Whittaker. Of course, I don't know what the discussions were in the committee, but I say it was advertised as sociological studies. And the prime mover was, one of the prime movers was the professor of psychology, who was a primate man, and he knew Beattie. And oh no, I recruited Reynolds. No. The psychologist was Hall, and then he had John Cook there, who was another man on the zoological side. But no, Hall died quite quickly from a bite from one of his own monkeys. Just after a while. No, Vernon Reynolds. I was very pleased when I found him. But one reason was I thought that Shils was going to make a tremendous as the course was usually titled. And it was so wonderful to get Vernon, along to teach a course on starting with chimpanzees and hamsters and things like that. Because he could talk about topics that at that time were very difficult for us. I mean, Carlton Gadujek, when he came together for Huxley lecture, was saying, look, anthropology is also sexual biology more than it is. I was also saying, yes, I'm totally persuaded by it. I've thought this for some time, but what happens if you do? Everybody looks at you, or will look at you, as the, what's he into that for? What's funny with him? But, I was so pleased to have Vernon, because he could approach these topics in a totally unembarrassed way.
What was the central kind of, as I say, you wrote an oral lecture when you started the job.
Yeah.
What was your sort of vision for the department of sociological studies?
Well, we called it sociology, actually. I mean, when the VC wrote to me, offering my request, he said, I propose we call it because I took a radical Browning, which would want to have sociology, have social anthropology as part of sociology, comparative sociology. I hoped to do it like that. I didn't succeed that. we had Mick Banton along, we had Ian Hamlet, Rohit Bharat there now. Some of the others have taken some interest in an anthropological perspective, but the pressure is obviously.
Was it the time when you began to become more and more interested in race relations, or have you been, in a sense, working on race relations ever since then?
That's right, yes. And
It was about this time that you were set up the
yes, I was an unsuccessful candidate for the chair of sociology at Reading. Had I been appointed there, I would almost certainly give a police study, you know. And then, just after I came to Bristol, there was a chair of sociology at Cambridge. Now, I didn't put in for it, you know, but if I had, and let us say that Radzanovich, you know, had been in power over the appointment, I have no idea about it, and had I gone to Cambridge, then again I might have developed this interest in police. So that it was, to a degree, fortuitous that I went to Bristol. The SSRC started up a unit to follow on from the Cullen citizenship book, you know, the Into the Race Relations book, and that drew me into race relations. The Vice Chancellor put me on as the University representative on the regional political board. I got out of that, and I took up the unit to the time consuming. I wasn't really contributing much. And he also got me onto the local bench. But that used to take up chunks of my Easter vacation, you know, at the time when the ASA was meeting. And then I was on the Royal Commission on Criminal Procedure, you know, that was taking up, you know, lots of these extra times. So that whereas up to the early 70s I'd been a fairly good attender at professional meetings of a variety of kinds, and thereafter I just didn't have to look.
You mentioned two things. One was your work on the bench.
Yes.
How long did you have to stay?
30 years.
30 years. You found that rewarding?
Yes, I did. I didn't expect it. See, I came from Scotland, where they virtually don't have TV. And I thought that, you know, this work was for the professionals. And I came to conclude that it wasn't, that we do need lay people there to keep the professionals in order. Barristers would be impossible if they didn't have to talk to juries. That's the only thing that keeps them human. And in the same way with the magistrates' courts, the judiciary is important, but it's going down the street. Yes, all along, yeah. From being a schoolboy reading stories of Marshall Hall, other famous advocates. Yes, but I mean Gluckman. Yes, but I didn't find the intelligence all that interesting, and I haven't kept up. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, 60. Yes. Yes. I didn't make any very big contribution. Gluckman was running the whole show. And I was, you know, since the decisions he was taking were all, you know, very sensible ones, you know, where I knew anything about them, because a lot of it related to people I didn't know. But since it all seemed to be going so well, I was, you know, just content to be a scribe and implement some of the things he wanted implemented. Well, they were very good scripts. I didn't need to do very much. editing can be an art, but those contributors were so good. And the original volumes didn't have me down as it. They had me down just as general editor. Now that was Max's position. He thought it was enough if my name would be the general editor. And he didn't listen to the argument, but when people quote you in references, they will want the name to use for reference. But they came back to it.
Did you get on well with him?
Oh yes, fine.
You liked him?
Yes. No.
Yeah.
Oh.
One other thing that happened around this time is that you went to the States.
Yes. Yes.
For 2 years.
No, just one.
What influences did that have on you? Or what did you remember?
Oh no, I'd started to do research. No, 1960 was Africa, and there were only 2 or 3 Africanists around in the States at that time, and so there was an MIT alumnus who had invented the missile and that needed to make requests for donations. His wife had worked on the Africa desk of the U.S. Information Service. They came to Cambridge, Massachusetts, telling Harvard and MIT that they would endow chairs of African studies and chemical engineering. And the universities assumed that Harvard would get the form and MIT would have it. And they decided no, the other way around. So MIT had an African chair which it gave to the political science section of the economics department. And they decided to fill it on a visiting basis. And somebody there had seen me at a conference in Chicago. And so one morning when I opened the post in bed at the time, I got this letter saying, will you come to MIT in a year? And I handed it over to my wife and said, I found it so on camera. Because we just got a new house. We built our own house in the country. It was a lovely place, and we were very happy there. And I said, I can't accept that. And so I went to MIT, but I didn't go for the regular academic year. I went in February to Gellner. And when I was there, I continued with my thesis. I never went really to any prisons. I approached Boston Police Department, and all my colleagues thought this was the headstone. Here, the high English in Scotland trying to get into the Irish department. It didn't work at all. I wrote to the, and I got. I found a suburban department and I wrote to the research director of the International Association of Chiefs about getting some funds for this emigration. He said they had trawled all the foundations and there wasn't one that would support police research. That was in 62. I mean, that was how good US capitalism was looking after its own interests. I mean, I put it that way because of what the market. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Nope, not at all. Nope. I took my lead from Papa. Well, Marxism was historicism. Historicism leads to things like Nazism. Yes. So, I mean, the Marxist influence was very, very strong. Very, very strong. So, I saw my task as being not to denounce it, but to try to reason it. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh no, I think there has been a great increase in understanding. And for anybody who follows populism, the key thing is to go to knowledge. And what you do in order to increase knowledge. Huxley and Haddon had argued in 1935 for ethnic groups and race and racism. The first UNESCO statement on race in 1950, which was partly I should not have said it was better in the mid-60s, race relations was conceived as having three dimensions: the ideological, which was where the key concept of racism, the doctrine; the psychological, which was prejudice; and sociological, which was discrimination, tradition. And then it was all upset in '67 with the Black Power movement wanting to use the word racism in the same sense as race relations, to comprehend all three dimensions. And we got that problem over the World Conference against Racism, when they're starting this work in Durban. Bart's book was 69, wasn't it? Ethnic Groups and Boundaries. And that whole argument was vehemently opposed by Henry Smith. So there were only some people who were picking it up. I didn't think Freddie Bailey picked it up at that time, did he? No. So I think Barth was on his own for this. And the key thing, I think, was getting away from the notion of ethnic groups as a comprehensive category, in the way in which it is being used by people associated with the human relations area file in Australia, and which was in our old article in the current anthropology. Barth was slicing it up so that we were looking at ethnic boundaries instead of ethnic groups. That was deliberate. I didn't see it at the time. It was one of my students, that got me to see that it was important. That was Patricia Jeffrey. Yes. Yes, that was it, but it also opened the door to new nomenclature. You see, now, listen to the TV news. Everybody's happily talking about ethnic Albanians in Macedonia. They would not have understood that expression 10 years ago. It's changed in Bosnia when people started talking about ethnic Muslims, because you had there people who were called Muslims but didn't practice the faith. So they had to call them ethnic Muslims. Then after a bit, why you had Claire Short calling herself an ethnic Catholic. But this is, I say it's liberating, it's opened up in that we're now using the word ethnic to apply to a much greater range of things. I mean, just art, skirt, fashion, cooking, stuff like that, leaving them aside. But with respect to social relations. So I'm talking about ethnic preferences and ethnic alignment and ethnic affiliation, ethnic this and that, which one never did when one was using the racial idiom. with the implication that everything reduces to a biological source.
That someone who was unpersuaded and very tough-minded and then split.
Yeah.
You find his idea of plural society helpful.
No, not at all. No.
Why not?
Well, it works to a limited extent for what they wanted to say about pluralism in Africa, but it doesn't work for the West Indies. And pluralism, the idea of the plural society comes in, and it comes in the work of for the Marxists and the people who take a Marxist inspiration, because they are assuming that people's responses will be class determined, and it didn't work in societies like South Africa. So they needed, from their point of view, they needed to differentiate them as a different kind of society. So they called them plural societies, picking up from Cernival, who had misrepresented the data in Southeast Asia anyhow. There is an article in Essays in Racial Studies by an Australian historian with a name something like Cowell, which has gone back and looked at Cernival's material and shows that he misrepresented it. And this kind of thing happens often. Do you know Terry Peachtree, geographer at Cambridge, and the famous triple melting pot on New Haven marriage statistics, arguing for the Protestant Catholic Jew set up? Well, Peach went back and looked at the data and found that the data they never supported the conclusions again. I mean, from your background as a historian, you will understand. No. What are you saying about that? Yes, I do, yes. But what conclusions are you drawing? Some of them, yes, some of that, yes. There is a lot to be said for Bert in that he gave us the 11 plus. And the 11 plus, although our generation disparages it, in its time it was a very progressive measure because it was a way of opening up educational opportunities for people who were previously excluded. So, I mean, it was Bert's later plus where he seems to have been suffering. But make just one point. You haven't asked about it. I'm pleased you haven't asked about it, but some people do. I've at times been asked, are you really a sociologist or an anthropologist? Which is a silly question. And is it right to somebody like Clyde Mitchell? I mean, he was accepted by social anthropologists, by sociologists, I think even by demographers. And in Salisbury, one year he taught the first year statistics class for the whole university. That's to say for mathematicians as well as for social scientists. And if you're accepted, you're a dentist if you're accepted as a dentist by other dentists. And so that I've been delighted that I'm accepted as an anthropologist in my times was a bit marginal, and that I'm accepted as a sociologist too. I've been accepted as a criminologist on occasion, and I get particular pleasure when lawyers find that they have to treat my argument seriously. what does one do as an anthropologist, or what? I mean, I wouldn't have much hesitation when you get culture to think they should kill twins. And saying no. The problem, it can be a problem, I would imagine. I don't think I've ever been in it myself, of whether you stand back when people are murdering one another, committing other social abuses. I've never been put to that test, but I'm sure I would consider it. Whether I could rationalise it, I don't know.
This is something that came up in the Leverhulme Trust.
Yeah.
In relation to this stuff.
Yes.
I thought you dealt with that very sensitively.
I've forgotten it now. I suppose that much of this, but I think this is subjective. I don't think it's really any importance to other people. Would be a utilitarian. You know? If I intervene, what could I achieve, and what would the costs and benefits be? I would prefer rule utilitarianism to act utilitarianism. Yeah.
You mentioned also another philosopher, Alan Macfarlane,
Yes.
on the logical questions and answers.
Yes.
What did you find Macfarlane was
Well, I puzzled over some of those passages in the autobiography.
The book of Gellner also especially about
Yeah. And there is a paper of A.D. Ritchie in Mind on a logical question and answer, which I found
this is essentially methodology.
Yes.
I don't know if rules that I talked about, but what was your theoretical methodology for this theory?
Yes. Yes. Of course, Popper isn't not such an awful lot of help when it comes to social science, because it's not social science material that he's discussing. And I've argued, I think, that a modest position as to what social sciences can explain. I argue that they can only answer their own questions, that you can't account exhaustively for events. And if you can only ask your own questions, then it becomes all the more important to ask good questions. One which assists the growth of knowledge.
Can I just go back to about sociology? I was quite surprised when you said that you thought that sociology was restricted couldn't give a whole answer. Whereas something like history or why should it be ancient history? With a fuller account than sociology.
They're different kinds of accounts. Yeah.
One
No, they're just different.
historical is one eventually leads to another causal.
History is telling stories, and that depends on the stories that people in a particular generation want to hear. They want closely in sequences interpreted. But what works as an interpretation varies from one generation and one culture to another. And I don't think I can't really see there being a history which overcomes generational and cultural transition or literature. But sciences do attempt something more universal.
Where would you place social sciences? Are they on the side of science or
Oh yes, yes. It's true. And I don't think I see cultural studies as social science enterprise. It's pushing it in a soft direction.
Well, probably a rather paradoxical, because on the one hand, social sciences are more restricted than, say, history and literature.
Yep.
On the other hand, they are mature in some sense.
Oh yes, definitely. Their vision is more restricted. You know? They have to focus themselves to answering a more limited question than the kind that historians do. I mean, historians often have to review everything that's happening at a particular time in order to decide whether it's relevant to their work. So they're starting, and the question they're trying to answer, why was the war in 1914, tends to be a big one. It's no use in addressing it. Much more difficult. Much more difficult. I think I don't know enough of Weber's early work to be sure, because he has. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, towards the end of his life, certainly he was unquestioned. For me, that's social science, and he had gone over to what I would think of as methodological individualism. I mean, 3 months before he died, he was saying, if I'm a sociologist according to my appointment papers, it's because I've taken on this job in order to expel methodological collectivism. And that's the direction in which he was going. He died too soon. De Tocqueville, I think it's very important to recognize the philosophy of history, and that we all, anybody who's working in this field, must have a philosophy, and therefore it's a good idea to try to be explicit about it. And I sympathize with Gibbons. But no, it's not. The register of the crimes, follies and misfortunes of mankind. I mean, our crimes, follies and misfortunes are important. We ought to learn from it. Somebody says you can't learn, if you don't learn from history, you don't learn from something else, something to that. De Tocqueville, he was a borderline character. It's a very good question. Do you have to classify? Oh, yes. When I started, see, at Edinburgh, at my time, the older professor of economics, used to take wealthy patients to social. I thought that was great. And when I started at Bristol, I thought, can I take this to the world? And I looked through it saying, could I use this as a first aid text? And I was very sad to find I really couldn't. At that time, I thought there was a lot to be said for having as your textbook something which the students had to criticize. You don't want a textbook that they learn off by heart. It can be an advantage to have an out-of-date textbook, because then they can't get away from copying it out. Yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I doubt if we've got a difference between them. No, I was saying that it's because of my reference to cultural studies, which has been getting popular. And cultural studies really is a derivative of art. And it's seeking those kinds of explanations, softer versions of those kinds of explanations, without all the baggage. But that's the thrust of it. No, never at all. When Jean Flood was at Newman and Robin Matthews was at Clare, they had a seminar. This would have been early 80s when I was on the Royal Commission on Criminal Procedure, and they asked me to come along and talk about it. And I couldn't find the time, but I didn't have anything to say. And I felt rather bad about this. I felt I ought to be able to, because I've been privileged by comparison to lots of my colleagues in getting into these sort of policy situations. I never found it problematic. Your task oriented, specific jobs to do. In some situations, I'm thinking of the UN, one of the most useful things someone like me can do is draft posts in English. I was amazed to see James Huntsfather, one of the leading permanent secretaries when she retired, people were talking about her great qualities. She could, while almost minute-taking, she could produce at the end of a discussion a minute which everybody accepted, and which gave a coherent view of something that at the time was deemed incoherent. That's an important skill. I hope I've got a bit of it, obviously not as much as she has, but you can do a great deal in these bodies. It's the skill of an academic rather than any particular kind of so much of the work in the UN committee was delayed by the fact that we got lots of ambassadors who weren't accustomed to doing this sort of thing themselves. They were accustomed to having those. And lots of them were very astute, but they couldn't write. They couldn't take a sheet of publishing. Language is part of it. The man who used to sit on my left was a really Egyptian diplomat. And he would never write anything, although he spoke excellent English, he wouldn't write. Yes. I may have met him at the LSE. I think, no, he'd been there before. I think he got the John Locke scholarship, but I think he then was in Edinburgh for a year as a teaching assistant in moral philosophy. I think he then came with Julius Gould to LSE in 1951. So I might have met him briefly there, but I must have first heard him all of it, every principle. I haven't written what he has to say about some other things. I thought his Plough, Sword and Book, and that's why I got the right order, you know. I didn't get on so much with the legitimation, the civil society. Some of the essays, the stuff on what is it, criticism in the social sciences, and that relativity in the social sciences, that's There's a brilliant lecture there, which he first gave in Bristol. Didn't give him half. His essay on function, function he gave to the International Sociological Association. Wow. Yeah. But there again, words and things, you know. I read it carefully at the time it came out, and it was very helpful. But there again, there are lots of sentences that he never completes. He ends up with a row of dots instead. And his standards of craftsmanship were not up to his quality of imagination.
Talking about this,
Sure. Ah, yes.
One day you may or may not discover
I didn't quite say that. I mean, yes, and prejudice is learned. Okay, it's learned. That doesn't mean to say there could not be some inheritance. You just don't know. And behavior genetics is such a new development field. I didn't want to. I mean, you see, there are people who make these categorical statements. And they come up in some of the UN proclamation. But you get, I haven't got the right source, I need to look again. You get a statement about humans being equal in dignity and rights. And going on from that to say, therefore, any theory of racial differences is scientifically falsified and objectionable. I haven't got the right words, but they derive an empirical proposition from a moral premise. And there are statements around in this literature which would say that there are people would argue from these standpoints that one should never conduct research into the possibility of the inheritance of prejudice, and that it must be bad if people come up with that proposition. Some of the reactions to the bell curve were hysterical. I was saying that it was important to find out that it's learned. I'm not by that saying that it's the end of the argument. You might not get new knowledge. Sorry if I wasn't clear. I used to do that more before I got a computer. I just laughed and laughed. I'm calling on some of these papers around the branch. Yeah. 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 Yes. The cards. Yes. 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 I mean, a lot depends on having a structure with which to work. The most difficult book I had to organize was the one about my UN committee. And yes, you see, lawyers would write about that by taking the convention and going through it article by article. And I could have commented in article by article on what had happened in the committee, well, during its time, including the time when I was a member. Or I could have tried taking it country by country. It posed problems of organisation which were immense. And after this, after some years of thinking about it, I hit on the scheme that I used there, and then bingo, no more trouble. Yeah. And I think that was, for example, that was important in that book of mine, Racial Theory. You know have you seen how I structured that? Racism, racism, this, that, and the other. But nobody had done that before. And a lot of people found it very helpful. So it was deciding to use that sort of structure. Once you got the structure.
The structure comes from the recipe for that paper.
Yeah.
Or you walk around.
No. Sit in a chair, sit in that chair. Nice, comfortable Swedish chair. D.H. Lawrence apparently said, how can I tell what I think until I see what I've written? And I can't think without it. Go to the computer. But there I was referring to race relations. So you would think of books like Dollard's Caste and Class in the Southern Town. Some of these studies of the Deep South, which was one of them, which have got the kind of relevance that you knew for social anthropology. And then what gets accepted in this canon is another issue. I mean, there are things that I would want in it that nobody else teaching in that field would have in it. And when I was teaching social anthropology at Edinburgh, there did seem to me to be a canon around easily important and first and custom. I'm not so sure that there is a canon now.
What are the ones that you would like to present to your colleagues?
Oh, of course, a lot of my own books. I mean, I think racial and ethnic competition, I believe that is a very significant contribution organising thought and material on the subject. Most people working in the field wouldn't do so. And then I picked on things. For example, there was a book by Graham Watson about South Africa. Passing for White, the study of racial assimilation in the South African schools. Now that was a highly atypical school, which was having difficulty surviving and keeping up its numbers on the fringes of Cape Town, and was doing so by admitting a whole lot of students who wouldn't have been admitted to regular white school, so that you had the interest of the staff to keep the school going, which meant they couldn't be too particular about the children they accepted to their constituency apartheid. And I thought that by studying that situation, it threw a whole lot of light on how the apartheid regulations work. My South African students looked at me in amazement, Why do you take a book like this, It's utterly unrepresentative. But this is, and I learned this from Max, running through my troubles as a research worker since I graduated is what some call the micro-macro model. And Max comes up with a solution in the analysis of the social situation in modern Zululand of how to look for the macro in the micro. And Clyde Mitchell does it even better in the Corella Dance. And I tried to do it in that book, Racial Minorities. And Watson does that there. And I think that I do think the macro-micro problem is very, very important. And that one should select book sources which bear on